I stood completely paralyzed, gripping a rusted piece of iron in my palm, while my own flesh and blood smirked at my ruin. My wife of 4 decades had just been buried, my only child was legally throwing me out onto the street, and the sole thread keeping me from total psychological collapse was a cryptic, breathless whisper from a dying woman. Trust the dirt. Sighs. Have you ever watched the person you raised look at you like you were nothing but a disposable inconvenience? The polished conference table felt like an endless ocean. Helen, our estate attorney, anchored the far end, adjusting her spectacles over a thick leather binder. Across from me sat Marcus and his wife, leaning in like vultures circling a fresh kill. Exhales sharply. It had been exactly 1 week since cancer took Ginny. 7 days of suffocating numbness, hollow casseroles from strangers, and my son aggressively making phone calls while I stared blankly through the living room glass. Helen cleared her throat, breaking the heavy silence. She began reading the final testament of the woman I loved, drafted mere months before her final breath. Ginny was a planner. She always knew what was coming. The sprawling Tulsa mansion, our sanctuary valued at $3.5 million, went directly to Marcus. His wife let out a breathless gasp of victory. His jaw clenched, but absolute triumph danced in his eyes. Helen kept reading. The investment portfolios, the corporate retirement funds, $12 million in total liquid assets. I did the math by pure instinct, an old habit from my decades as a high school math teacher. 12 million to the boy who couldn't even hold his mother's hand in her final hours. Then Helen flipped the heavy parchment. My chest hammered against my ribs. To her husband, she left the forgotten Osage County acreage. 800 acres of desolate plains featuring a collapsing structure. County tax value, a meager fraction of her wealth. The room went dead silent. Marcus blinked, his arrogant posture faltering. He let out a harsh, venomous laugh. He mocked the inheritance, scoffing that his retired father was being exiled to a worthless, rotting shack. His wife placed a manicured hand on his arm, playing the sympathetic partner while Marcus demanded Helen check for a typo. He insisted I knew absolutely nothing about working the earth. Helen remained entirely impassive, stating the documents were ironclad. I sat frozen. Why this barren wasteland? Ginny and I never discussed it. I hadn't even laid eyes on the place. Then Helen slid a cream-colored envelope across the mahogany wood. My name was etched in Ginny's unmistakable cursive, accompanied by a strict instruction. Only open upon arriving at the property. Marcus violently pushed his chair back, threatening to hire a legal team. Helen met his fury with absolute boredom, warning him that contesting the finest estate lawyer in the state would only burn his newly acquired cash. He turned his rage toward me, spitting his words like acid. He demanded to know if I was actually going to accept this humiliation. I couldn't find my voice. I merely whispered that it was her final wish. He stormed out, slamming the heavy oak door, leaving me in the echoing quiet with a heavy, rusted antique key. What kind of woman leaves her devoted husband with nothing but a mystery and a dilapidated ruin? I drove back to the mansion that no longer belonged to me. Marcus had already banished me to the smallest guest room, claiming the master suite was undergoing immediate renovations. Barely an hour later, he forced his way into my cramped space without knocking, tossing an official legal notice onto the mattress, an eviction mandate. I had barely 3 weeks to vacate the premises. He cited his desire to start a family, coldly suggesting I go rot on the inherited wasteland. He even warned me against taking any valuables, claiming every piece of silver and art was legally his. I sat alone in the shadows of my former life, clutching the heavy antique key. The next morning, the brutal sound of diesel engines shattered my grief. Heavy construction crews invaded the property, violently tearing apart Ginny's beloved home office. Marcus stood on the porch, casually sipping artisanal coffee while strangers dismantled her legacy. When I tried to rescue a simple silver-framed photograph of Ginny from our early days, Marcus ordered it thrown into the dumpster just to keep the expensive metal. Can you imagine the suffocating weight of watching your entire history erased in an instant? I retreated to my temporary cell, staring at an old wedding photograph. We had started with nothing. She built an energy empire from the ground up while I happily taught teenagers. We had it all. But when the terminal diagnosis arrived, she began locking her doors, taking secret trips, hiding documents. In her final moments, she pulled me close, her breath failing, and begged me not to let our son take the land. Betrayal breathes the same air you do. A few days later, Marcus escalated his assault. He brought a slick elder care specialist into the dining room, sliding a blue folder toward me. A durable power of attorney. They wanted complete, irrevocable control over my finances, my medical choices, and the rural acreage. Marcus claimed the county was threatening to seize the land over unpaid back taxes, framing his hostile takeover as an act of mercy. If I refused, they threatened to petition a judge to declare me mentally incompetent and lock me away. I looked into the eyes of the boy I taught to ride a bicycle, searching for a shred of humanity. There was none. I ordered them out, but my nightmare was just beginning. While dragging the trash bins, I discovered Marcus's discarded paperwork. Glossy brochures for a miserable, low-rated senior confinement facility. The move-in date was set, the deposit already paid. He had executed these documents while his mother was actively dying in the next room. He didn't just want the money, he wanted me erased. If you are feeling the agonizing weight of this father's betrayal, softly tap the like button and stay close. The secret buried beneath that dirt is about to change everything. When the official tax lien arrived demanding nearly $20,000, Marcus pounced again, offering me a pathetic cash buyout. He promised to take the burden off my hands. But Helen, the attorney, called me in secret. She explicitly warned me that the land was shielded by an unbreakable trust. She urged me to hold my ground and head west. On my final morning at the mansion, a bulldozer violently tore through Ginny's meticulously cultivated rose garden to make way for a swimming pool. I sprinted outside, dropping to my knees in the displaced soil, frantically digging out the single yellow rose bush she had planted for our 25th anniversary. Marcus watched me with empty, dead eyes as I loaded it into my truck. I drove 2 hours into the desolate unknown. The Oklahoma plains stretched endlessly. The structure was exactly as described. Sagging, rotting, entirely isolated. I planted the rescued rose in a whiskey barrel on the creaking porch. That night, alone in the suffocating darkness, I listened to a pocket dial recording I had managed to capture from Marcus's phone. His hushed voice echoed in the empty room, boasting to an unknown partner about stealing the drilling rights for the entire sector. He bragged about the fake guardianship petition. He was going to institutionalize me and steal a fortune. Power whispers. Desperation screams. At dawn, I finally broke the wax seal on Ginny's letter. It directed me to a hidden attic inside the crumbling red barn. I climbed the terrifyingly fragile ladder, my flashlight cutting through decades of thick dust, until I found an olive-drab military trunk. The rusted key turned smoothly. Inside were meticulously organized folders. My blood turned to absolute ice as I read the contents. Over the last year of her life, my brilliant wife had secretly documented Marcus forging her signature, embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars through shell accounts. But that was merely the surface. The next folder revealed a sickening conspiracy with Victor Hartman, her most vicious corporate rival. They had colluded for over a year to declare me legally incompetent, force me into a decaying facility, and purchase the barren land for pennies. Why? Because the dirt wasn't barren. The final folder contained a massive geological survey. We were sitting directly on top of an underground ocean of recoverable crude. $25 million worth of liquid gold. Ginny hadn't left me a worthless farm. She had engineered an impenetrable fortress. She had locked the property inside an irrevocable trust with a lethal ethics clause. If Marcus attempted to contest the will, steal the land, or partner with Victor, he would instantly forfeit his entire $12 million inheritance and face immediate federal wire fraud charges. She knew her son was a monster. and she spent her dying breaths building a cage to trap him. The next morning, the predators arrived. 2 luxury vehicles tore up the gravel driveway. Marcus stepped out alongside Victor Hartman, oozing false confidence. They offered me $10 million in cash to walk away and hand over the deed. They thought I was a broken, terrified old man. Instead of arguing, I pulled out my phone and played the secret audio recording of their criminal conspiracy at maximum volume. The color instantly drained from my son's face. Victor's arrogant smile violently collapsed. Before they could even attempt to recover, 2 more vehicles arrived. Helen and the CEO of a massive energy corporation stepped out into the harsh sunlight. Helen aggressively served them with terrifying legal notices. She outlined the lethal ethics trigger. If they took one more step, Marcus would lose his mansion, his millions, and spend a decade in federal lockup. Furthermore, the energy CEO revealed that Ginny had already signed a drilling partnership months ago. I was retaining an unheard of 75% of the net royalties. The heavy machinery was arriving next week. Victor realized he had been completely outplayed by a ghost. He abandoned my son in the dirt and sped away. Marcus stood alone, his empire of lies crumbling around him. He looked at me, silently begging for the fatherly grace he had violently discarded. I offered him absolutely nothing. He drove away and I never spoke to him again. Within a year, the violent hum of massive steel derricks became the heartbeat of the property. The black gold flowed relentlessly. But the ultimate revelation came when the federal authorities arrived at my door. My late wife hadn't just built a trust. She had spent 20 grueling months acting as a confidential informant for the FBI. Victor Hartman was publicly arrested and sentenced to 15 years in federal lockup for aggressive industrial espionage. To avoid sharing a concrete cell, Marcus turned state's evidence. He avoided prison, but the government stripped his financial licenses. His wife abandoned him. He lost every single penny of his blood money. The last I heard, the boy who tried to throw me into a rotting asylum was selling heavily used vehicles in the desert, living month to month in a tiny apartment. I didn't buy a yacht or a sports car with the massive quarterly deposits. I established a massive charitable foundation in the name of the greatest woman I ever knew. We funded full collegiate rides for underprivileged youth, aggressively backed local entrepreneurs, and paid off crippling medical debts for desperate families fighting terminal illness. 3 years later, I sat on a sturdy wooden bench surrounded by 50 blooming yellow rose bushes. The air smelled of sweet soil and distant machinery. I am a wealthy man, but my riches aren't in the bank. They are in the absolute peace of knowing I protected the legacy of a woman who loved me enough to wage a silent war on my behalf. If this journey of ultimate vindication moved you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. What would you have done if your own flesh and blood tried to erase you? I read every single response. Stay strong, protect your legacy, and never underestimate the quiet ones.